Welcome to this first session, working session of the ICMH Congress here in Athens. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to chair the first session. And I have three well-known colleagues and historians under my command. Professor Dr. Kostis from Greece, Dr. Enrico Magnani from Italy, and Alan Klebanov. And I will have them under my command for 90 minutes, and that's an honor. They are tapping their feet to start. However, before handing over the floor to them, I would like to mention the rules of the game. Every speaker has 20 minutes for his presentation in order to have time for questions and debate. And I will keep a strict hand with regard to the 20 minutes. I also ask the speakers to support our interpreters in a challenging job by not talking as rapid as machine guns fire bullets. Right, let's get cracking. This first speaker is Alan Klebanov, an old hand within our ICMH community. He studied in Tel Aviv University and is a specialist in the Napoleonic era. He describes himself as a confessed Philhellenistic and thus should feel at home here. Alain, from liberty to Eleftheria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Greece awaits a liberator. There will be brilliant crown. Next slide, please. Okay. Greece awaits a liberator. There will be a brilliant crown of glory. What glory to him who will liberate Greece. His name will be engraved beside that of Homer, Plato, and Epaminondas. I nourished such a hope when I was fighting in Italy. Not many people are familiar with Napoleon's words, quoted by Comte de Lascaz, the author of Le Mémorial de Sainte-Hélène, referring to his first Italian campaign of 1796-97. Next slide, please. This campaign, the very first, the road to fame in the annals of glory of the young General Napoleon Bonaparte, was destined to play a critical role, although relatively unfamiliar, outside Greece, anyway, in the path from liberté, next one, to Eleftheria, next one. The Age of Reason, next slide please, was indeed a period in which harmony and stability were the ideals in all spheres, philosophical, political, and even artistic. The concept of the European concert embodies this spirit perfectly, as the principle of the balance of power represents. The great five European powers sparred, formed alliances, and switched allegiances according to their interests, religiously following the hallowed principle of the balance of power. One of the terms extensively used throughout the period was classical. Far from being a coincidence, one of the premier men of letters of the century, next slide please, and undoubtedly one of the most influential, was Johann Joachim Winckelmann, regarded by many as the father of the discipline of art history. By becoming the first Hellenist, Winckelmann set the standard and became the prototype of the infatuation with Greece. His would be the decisive influence of the rise of the neoclassical movement during the late 18th century. His writings influenced not only a new science of archaeology and art history, but Western painting, sculpture, literature, and philosophy. His subsequent influence in Germany has been provocatively called the tyranny of Greece over Germany. But I would argue that it became a tyranny of Greece over Europe. The writings of Johann Joachim Winckelmann were not only crucial by shaping neoclassicism in both architecture and the visual arts, but they created a long-lasting impact on the European collective psyche, thus laying the ground for the events to follow, and for the later phenomenon of Philhellenism. What better quote reflects his views? The only way for us to become great, or if this be possible, inimitable, is to imitate the ancients. Napoleon, a true son of the Enlightenment and an admirer of Winckelmann, who proving it by ordering the purchase of his notebooks for the Bibliothèque Nationale, was destined to carry the ideal a step further. Winckelmann died in 1768. Napoleon was born a year later in 1769. What was Greece then? Was it real or just an ephemeral idea, a distant dream? The final demise of the Byzantine Empire came with the fall of Constantinople in 1453. By the early 16th century, all of mainland Greece and most of the islands were in Ottoman hands, Turkocratia, excluding several port cities, etc. Despite the defeat in the Battle of Lepanto, which effectively removed the threat to the Western Mediterranean, by the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire controlled the Eastern Mediterranean, with a notable exception. The Ionian Islands were never ruled by the Ottomans, with the exception of Kefalonia for 2 short periods. La Serenissima, the maritime Republic of Venice, was the main rival of the Ottoman Empire, retaining hold of a string of territorial possessions in the Eastern Mediterranean called Stato da Mar, or Domini da Mar, including at various times, parts of what is now Istria, Dalmatia, Montenegro, Albania, Greece, and the Ionian Islands. Peloponnesos, Crete, Cyclades, Evia, as well as Cyprus. The overseas possessions, particularly the islands, played a critical role in Venice's commercial and military leadership. In his landmark study on the Mediterranean world in the 16th century, the great historian Fernand Braudel described these islands as Venice's motionless fleet. The constant wars between Venice and the Ottoman Empire even resulted in a temporary conquest of the Morea, which was the name of the Peloponnesos Peninsula during the Middle Ages and the early modern period. It was lost, the Venetians couldn't hold it, and it was lost again to the Ottomans in 1715. The Mediterranean gradually lost its political and economic importance. The base of European power shifted northwards, and the once wealthy Italy became a peripheral area dominated by foreigners. The Ottoman Empire also began a slow decline that saw its North African possessions gain de facto independence and its European holdings gradually reduced by the increasing power of Austria and Russia. By the middle of the 18th century, both Venice and the Ottoman Empire were no more than shadows of their former glory. The modern concept of political liberty has its origins in the Greek concepts of freedom and slavery. To be free for the Greeks was not to have a master, to be independent from a master and to live as one likes. That was the original Greek concept of freedom. It is closely linked with the concept of democracy, as Aristoteles puts it. This, then, is one note of liberty which all Democrats, next slide please, which all Democrats affirm to the principle of their state. Another is that man should live as he likes. This, they say, is the privilege of a free man, since, on the other hand, not to live as a man likes is the mark of a slave. This is the second characteristic of democracy, whence has arisen the claim of men to be ruled by none, if possible, or if this be impossible, to rule and be ruled in terms. So it contributes to the freedom based upon equality. Aristoteles, he has it all. Indeed, these ideas were reflected in the writings of the political philosophers in the Age of Enlightenment, which centered on the sovereignty of reason and advanced ideals such as liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, separation of church and state, serving as the intellectual background of the French Revolution. The French Revolution is considered a watershed event in modern history, as it is regarded by many as the birth of modern nationalism and liberalism. Napoleon Bonaparte, the great son of the revolution, was a true product of the 18th century Enlightenment. And while, one must admit, he threw his lot with the revolution and the French Republic for practical reasons rather than ideological, He soon became an important agent of change. General Bonaparte invaded Italy in 1796. 10 years later, Hegel, the great German philosopher who nicknamed Napoleon Weltgeist zu Pferd, world spirit on horseback. Here, indeed, the world spirit was on the march. A string of dazzling victories followed. Napoleon conquered most of Italy in the name of the French Revolution and was promptly hailed as the liberator, at least in most places. So, liberté arrived in Italy. Unlike Italy, Greece was not in a complete political coma, as proven by the Orlov Revolt, which was mentioned in the excellent talk by Professor Sirigos before me. A Greek uprising in the Peloponnesos and later also in Crete that broke out in February 1770. The revolt, a precursor to the Greek War of Independence, was part of Catherine the Great, Katerina II, so-called Grečki project, the Greek project, and was eventually suppressed by the Ottomans. Another interesting precursor, which should be mentioned, the raids of Lambros Katsonis, a daring seaman whose actions were supported by Imperial Russia. Actually, the Grečki project, the Greek plan, was an early solution to the Eastern question, which was advanced by Catherine the Great in early 1780s. It envisaged the partition of the Ottoman Empire between the Russian and the Habsburg empires, followed by the restoration of the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. The watershed event was about to unfold. General Bonaparte's victories brought his army to within 100 miles of Vienna, and the Austrians sued for peace. On April 18, 1797, a general armistice and preliminary peace agreement between the Holy Roman Empire and the First French Republic was signed. It became known as the Treaty of Leoben, and it effectively ended the War of the First Coalition. It was signed by General Maximilian von Merfeldt and the Marquis of Gallo on behalf of the Emperor Franz II, and by General Napoleon Bonaparte on behalf of the French Directory. The treaty contained 9 public articles and 11 secret ones. In the public articles, the emperor ceded his Belgian provinces, the Austrian Netherlands, and in the secret articles, he ceded his Italian states, Lombardia, in exchange for the Italian mainland possessions of the Republic of Venice, which had not yet been conquered. Exactly a week later, on April the 25th, 1797, Napoleon openly threatened to declare war on Venice. The Venetian Senate acceded to numerous demands, but facing increasing rebellion and the threat of foreign invasion, it abdicated in favor of the transitional government of Jacobins, thus the French. On May the 12th, Ludovico Manin, the last Doge of Venice, formally abolished the most serene Republic of Venice after over 1,100 years of existence. On July the 11th, 1797, a decree abolished the ghetto. The Jews of Venice became officially equal, as any discrimination was contradictory to the Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen of 1789, especially the Article Premier. So, now Napoleon becomes a herald of both liberté and égalité for Italy and for Europe. The two different territories that had been once ancient Greece and the biblical land of Israel were both part of the Ottoman Empire, which Napoleon was certain at the time would fall during his lifetime. He was a Corsican. From his Mediterranean perspective, Jews and Greeks were similar, as ancient peoples now living partly under Ottoman rule and partly in broader diaspora. From his revolutionary perspective, the spirit of liberty ensured that in either case, national awakening was already on the horizon. General Bonaparte did not wait long with the implementation of a new revolutionary global vision. Venice and the mainland territories awaited their fate, but further east, history was about to be made. The actions he took had an effect on later Greek history, neither intended nor expected at the time. For hundreds of years, the once mighty Venetian Empire was traditionally divided into 3 parts: the city of Venice, the terraferma, the Venetian mainland, and the overseas empire. Well, anyway, what remained of it. The sole remaining overseas possessions of the once mighty Republic of Venice in the east, the Stato del Mar, were islands and territories in the Ionian Sea. These territories were, next one, these territories were commonly known as the Eptanesa, the 7 islands. The 6 northern islands in the Ionian Sea off the west coast of Greece are the islands of Kerkyra, Paxi, Lefkada, Kefalonia, Ithaki, and Zakynthos. Ithaki, who doesn't remember Odysseus? Who can forget Odysseus? Or Kavaphis, for that effect. The 7th island, Kythira, is off the southern tip of the Peloponnesos, is not geographically in the Ionian, but it was included in the Stato d'Amar, as well as few small islands, Trophades, etc., and a handful of enclaves on the Epirot mainland, namely the coastal cities of Parga, Preveza, Vonica, Arta, Astakos, and Butrint. From 1204, the Republic of Venice controlled Corfu, Kerkyra, and slowly all the Ionian islands fell under Venetian rule, Venetocratia or Enetocratia. The islands became the only part of the Greek-speaking world to escape Ottoman rule, Turcocratia. Corfu was the only Greek island never conquered by the Turks. Under Venetian rule, many of the upper classes spoke Italian or Venetian and converted to Roman Catholicism, but the majority remained Greek, ethnically, linguistically, and religiously. In the 18th century, a Greek national independence movement began to emerge, and the free status of the Ionian Islands made them the natural base for exiled Greek intellectuals, freedom fighters, and foreign sympathizers. The islands became self-consciously Greek as the 19th century, the century of Romantic nationalism, neared. The aristocratic form of governance and control of the islands, which remained unchanged despite the decline of Venice and the dismal state of the Venetian finances, and especially the unequal taxation, caused widespread discontent. The European Enlightenment, modern Greek Enlightenment, and even radical revolutionary ideas found fertile ground. These ideas were not only transmitted by the sons of nobles and cittadini who had studied primarily in Italy, but also by French agents active in the islands, both openly and clandestinely. Most notable was the French consul in Zakynthos, the merchant Constantin Zakynthis Gis, who not only fomented anti-Venetian feeling, but was suspected of orchestrating the arson of his own consulate on October the 29th, 1796, an event which was used by Napoleon as one of the pretexts for his declaration of war against Venice. Translations of French revolutionary songs as La Marseillaise began circulating in taverns, salons, and streets. The song which became the most popular was La Carmagnole. Greek patriotic songs also started to appear, some of the most famous being written by Rigas Fereios, like his popular Greek version of La Marseillaise, a version familiar through Lord Byron's paraphrase as "Sons of Greeks, arise." Fereios, an apostle of Greek nationalism, shortly a martyr, who wrote in Demotiki, Demotic Greek, rather than purist Katharevousa, the purist language, aroused the patriotic fervor of his Greek contemporaries, and is also remembered for the most famous poem, which we had the great privilege of hearing just some minutes ago, Thurios, the battle hymn, in which he wrote, "It's finer to live 1 hour as a free man than 40 years as a slave and prisoner." I'll return to Rigas Fereios later. Political associations began appearing, constituted by people from all classes of society, which were influenced by Freemasonry and Jacobinism, and inflamed by General Bonaparte's victory in Italy. They started calling themselves patriots or Carmagnoli because of the song La Carmagnole. The last Venetian Proveditore Generale d'Amar, the general governor, Carlo Aurelio Vidman, became aware shortly after General Bonaparte's 1796 invasion of Lombardy of the French successes. So he took special measures to strengthen the defense of the islands, even investing his own private fortune for the cause. Rumors of the self-abolition of the Maggior Concilio, the Great Council of Venice, on May the 12th, spread quickly to the islands, while pro-French elements, the patriots, Carmagnoli, were instructed by Gis on the meaning of concepts like liberty and equality. Many nobles mobilized against them, with proposals made even to kill all the French sympathizers. Despite such agitation, order was kept, and the definite news of the political change in the metropolis, with the establishment of new Republican Municipalité Provisoire de Venise, the provisional municipality of Venice, in early June, was met with calm and restraint. Widmann, who resided in Corfu, was notified of the event and received instructions to maintain order and begin the democratization of the local administration. On June the 27th, 1797, a mixed Franco-Venetian fleet under the Corsican General de Division, Antoine Gentili, arrived in Corfu. Amidst tumultuous reception by the local populace, General Bonaparte instructed Gentili to encourage the local inhabitants to pursue independence by reminding them of the glories of ancient Greece. 2 days later, Gentili issued a proclamation declaring that the French brought liberty to the islands. Although Widmann nominally remained the head of the administration, actual power lay with Gentili. Every aspect of government was quickly reformed. Liberty trees were planted in the main squares of towns, and the flag of San Marco was replaced by the French tricolor. Jacobin clubs were established, and wild ideas circulated, including the abolition of Christianity, the restoration of ancient Greek religion, Olympic Games, you name it. Everywhere, the destruction of the old symbols of Venice were accompanied by festivities of the populace. For the first time, extensive rule of the Greek language was made in public documents, which were headed with the words liberty and equality, and dated in imitation of the French revolutionary calendar as the first year of Greek liberty, Chronos protos tis eleftherias ton Grekon. The new political and administrational reality also demanded that new terms were invented, and thus introduced into the modern Greek language along with the ideas of the French Revolution. On October 1797, after 5 months of negotiations, General Napoleon Bonaparte, acting as the representative of the French Republic, and Count Philip von Cobenzl, the representative of the Habsburg monarchy, signed the Treaty of Campo Formio, which officially ended the War of the First Coalition against revolutionary France. The treaty meant the definitive end to the ancient Republic of Venice, which was disbanded and partitioned by the French and the Austrians. The islands and territories of the Ionian Sea were officially turned over to the French. Thus, the last vestiges of the Republic of Venice were swept away. The Ionian Islands, the most valuable part of Venice, according to French Foreign Minister Talleyrand, was left to the full sovereignty of France. On November the 1st, Napoleon's stepson, Eugène de Beauharnais, arrived in Corfu, and on the same day announced to the provisional municipality the terms of the Treaty of Campo Formio and the annexations of the islands to France. The news was received with great enthusiasm by the council, which ordered Eugène with a sword and voted to send a delegation to convey its gratitude to Napoleon, the world spirit who had just sowed the seeds of future Greek independence and brought about the transition from liberté to eleftheria. Short epilogue. Rigas Ferreios had entered communication with General Bonaparte, to whom he sent a snuff box made of a root of a bay laurel taken from the ruined temple of Apollo. And eventually he set out with a view to meeting with him in Venice. While traveling there, he was betrayed, arrested by the Austrians, handed over to the Ottomans, and executed. His last words are reported as being, "I have sown a rich seed. The hour is coming when my country will reap its glorious fruits." Nicolaus Skoufas was born in 1779 near Arta, one of the coastal towns which came under French rule. The events he had witnessed had a profound effect on him and helped shaping his path. In 1814, he founded with Emmanuel Xantos and Athanasios Tsakalov the Filiki Eteria, which was, of course, mentioned in the previous paper. The Society of Friends, the secret organization dedicated for laying the grounds for Greek independence. Therefore, it is indeed clear that both directly and indirectly, Napoleon had the most profound effect on the birth of modern Greek nationalism. We are in 2021, a year in which we commemorate the 200th anniversary of Napoleon's death and in which we celebrate...
You have 30 seconds left.
Okay, we celebrate the 200th anniversary of the outbreak of the Greek War of Independence. I regard this lecture as a humble tribute to both anniversaries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klevenov, for your very inspiring presentation. I would like now to hand over the floor to a familiar face with, and also another familiar face within our community. It's Dr. Enrico Magnani from Italy. Enrico is always willing to share the results of his academic research with us, but also his experience as a civilian officer with the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara. His PhD thesis dealt with the UN operations in Greece between 1947 and 1954. And today, he will discuss the question whether the foreign intervention in the Greek independence war was humanitarian-based or should be considered as a part of the more traditional power game. Enrico.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's a little bit hard address after a flamboyant presentation of Alon. My one will be more boring for sure. And I would like also to thank, not formally, the Greek Commission to give me the honor. In 1814, a secret organization called Philikieteria, or Society of Friends, was founded with the aim of liberating Greece from Ottoman domination. Encouraged by the revolutionary fervor gripping Europe in that period, following the French Revolution, Philikieteria planned to launch revolts in Peloponnese, Danubian principalities, and Constantinople as itself. It began the revolt on 17 March 1821 in the Danubian principalities, which had already a degree of autonomy from Constantinople and hosted a large Greek community, but here failed. Also from the lack of assistance from Russia, even was mentioned in a previous presentation. Thus, the insurgents in many parts achieved the result ousting the Ottomans. Revolts in Crete, Macedonia, and central Greece broke out, but were suppressed. Meanwhile, an improvised but very efficient Greek navy achieved successes against the Ottoman navy, leading to a stalemate situation. However, deep tension soon developed among different Greek factions, which allowed the Ottomans to reorganize their forces and obtain the Egyptian support, which helped bring back the situation under the control of the Sultan in 1826. At that point, three Greek powers, Russia, Great Britain, and France, decided to intervene militarily. This was a major shift, with heavy impact on the situation. Initially, all the European powers saw the Greek uprising as a danger for the Vienna recently established security architecture and tie it with the liberal-minded revolts in Italy, Spain, and Portugal in 1821. But it recorded also the first mobilization of intellectuals across the European continent and the US in favor of Greek people, and a heavy level of violence against civilian population pushed the powers' leadership to change their stance. The fall of Mussolini, one of the last pillars of the insurgency, was a turning point for their action, and the intervention of Britain, Russia, and France, and the Greek war independence is regarded as the first armed intervention on humanitarian ground in the world history. It is useful to remind that the Congress of Vienna, until the outbreak of the Greek independence, there was three views of intervention. Metternich pushed that the Greek power should take counter-revolutionary measures and intervene to suppress uprising against legitimate rules using the force. This doctrine, shared by the Tsar Alexander I and adopted by his political tool, the Holy Alliance between Russia, Austria, and Prussia, was endorsed by the Great Power Congresses system in Aix-la-Chapelle in November 1818, Troppau in November 1820, and Ljubljana in May 1821. The second view came from Britain Prime Minister Castlereagh, who stated in 19 January 1821 that states retained the right to interfere, quotation, where their own immediate security or essential interests are seriously endangered by the internal transaction of another state, and not as general and indiscriminate application to all revolutionary movements, end of quotation. The third approach was peaceful involvement, mainly mediation attempts. This can be discerned in the foreign policy initiative of the two main rivals of Metternich on the European scene, Ioannis Kapodistria, co-foreign minister of Russia with Carlo Berneserode, and George Canning as British foreign secretary. As mentioned, the fall of Missolungi in 1826 led the European powers to intervene in favor of revolutionary Greece, close to the total defeat. But it was not a purely innocent move. Instead, led by growing rivalries and concern to control and limit the gains of others in a critical area, junction point between Europe and Levant. The booster of the international action was the Prime Minister Castlereagh. He, aside the concern for the atrocities against the Greek population, wanted to avoid that France and Russia could erode role on major power in the Mediterranean. For France, after the expedition in Spain in 1821, was the occasion to regain the sympathies of the liberal environment lost after the reinstallation of an obscurantist regime in Madrid. For Russia, it was a chance to put forward to the Mediterranean waters. It should be recalled that the Tsar Nicholas I, in 1825, less than a month after his intronization, declared, Russia must become the third naval power after England and France, and must be more powerful than any coalition of secondary naval powers, and present herself as protector of Orthodox population in the Balkans and Levant. The concern to limit the foreseeable Russian expansionism was included in the Treaty of London, signed after long negotiation on 6 July 1827. Also bound Russia to promise to not attempt any territorial gain at the expenses of Turkey or secure any exclusive commercial advantage from the Ottoman Empire as the result of any subsequent action against Constantinople, which was perceived as imminent by France and Britain. St. Petersburg apparently accepted without major problems this kind of condition, clearly looking for a window of opportunity to push forward its priorities as it happened. The three main European powers has called upon Greece and Ottoman Empire to cease the hostilities, and in line with the progressive mechanism of the power concert, it was decided to use a mix of diplomatic pressure and persuasive show and use of force if required. The Allied power delegate met in London to set up a treaty focused to convince the Ottoman Empire to create an independent state for Greece with a formula of compromise acceptable for Constantinople. The idea was, while the Ottoman Empire would recognize the independence of Greece, the Sultan would be the supreme ruler of the country and receive a tribute. Additional articles were added to detail the response if the Sultan refused to offer mediation, continue the hostility in Greece, even in vague terms. The article detailed that the Turks had 1 month to accept the mediation or the Allied powers forming a partnership with Greece through commercial relations. Even if the proposal of the powers was just an enlarged autonomy, the Ottoman Empire, basing on its supposed superior military forces, rejected the treaty, which pushed the three European powers to intervene more openly. One of the dissuasive measures was a demonstration of force of a combined French, Russian, and British naval force, which entered in an impromptu battle in Navarino on 20 October 1827, with the Ottoman and Egyptian fleets there gathered as well, which were crushed. This, despite under the London Treaty terms, the three powers agreed to interpose themselves between Greeks and Turks, and quotation, without, however, taking part in the hostilities between the two contingent parties. Navarino was a major shift under military and political terms, with multiple effects, leading the Ottoman Empire into a suicidal corner, refusing any dialogue with the powers, despite the wishes of France and Britain that instead look is a limited, even unpleasant, incident not to compromise their future relation with Constantinople. Aside to it, the disappearance of the hostile naval threat, the Greek insurgents retake a push, and several Ottoman garrisons in the peninsula of Peloponnese surrendered, without any possibility to receive supply and reinforcement by sea, and the Greek revolutionary began to retake central Greece. More important, led door they opened to a Russian action against the Ottoman Empire, which was a strategic aim of the Tsarist government. This action was formally triggered by the blockade of the Strait to Russia as retaliation for the Navarino battle, but clearly Russia just looked for a casus belli. In July 1828, with the Russian war against Turkey was in full action, the three powers agreed with an ad hoc protocol to dispatch a French force to ensure the removal or withdrawal from Morea, Peloponnese, and only from that part of Greece, the Ottoman and Egyptian troops. The main task was to push out with peaceful means, if it's possible, the Egyptian forces, which were the ones, even with heavy losses, led the Greek insurgent into a politico-military corner to evacuate the occupied region and Peloponnese and allowing the establishment of an independent enclave. To reduce the political impact of a French military action, on 6 August 1828 was signed a convention in Alexandria, signed by the Viceroy of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, and the British Admiral Edward Codrington. The Egyptian commander Ibrahim Pasha agreed at the landing of the French troops to peacefully evacuate his forces and leaving the Peloponnese to the few Turkish troops, little more than 1,000, remaining there. On 29 August 1828, the French Expeditionary Corps of 15,000 men led by General Nicolas-Joseph Maison landed in southwestern Peloponnese. The Expeditionary Corps was allowed by the protocol authorizing their operation to act, quotation, in the name of the three courts of France, Britain, and Russia, and in their common interest, end of quotation. During the October, the French troops took the control of principal stronghold still held by the Turkish troops without major problem. While the exhausted Egyptian forces, only 20,000 remained of the original 40,000 landed, withdrew slowly but peacefully. The plans of the General Maison to expand the area of operation of the French Expeditionary Force to other areas of Greece and expel by force the Ottoman troops was explicitly rejected by Britain and Russia. A French presence in central Greece was refused and caused a veto by British, who instead favored the creation of a smaller Greek state, mainly in the Peloponnese. After the completion of the Egyptian withdrawal, rapidly emerged animosity between French troops and the local population, especially for the absence of any action against the Ottomans. Between November 1828 and February 1829, the main part of the force was withdrawing as well, leaving only 5,000 soldiers in the Peloponnese, and the contingent transferred the control of some forts to the Greek forces. But the tumultuous political life in Greece culminated with the assassination of the first president of the state, Ioannis Kapodistria, I already mentioned it before, on 27 September 1831, pushed the country in a new civil war, and the government appealed France's aid against its opponent, but the call was rejected. Instead, the London Conference of 7 March 1832 called on the French troops to interpose themselves between the opposing factions and impose the cessation of the hostilities. The contraposition between the French troops and some Greek faction was so heavy that escalated in clashes, which caused several dozen of deaths in Athens area in January 1833. As foreign force barely accepted, especially after the refusal of proceed toward central Greece, the French contingent had never been enough or given a current mandate other than intervene sporadically and with limited impact. Thus, while the London Conference, similarly with the London Protocol of 3 February of 1830, other than trying to limit the Russian influence in the region, worked very slowly to select a monarch for Greece, Otto of Wittelsbach, whose arrival was the signal of the final withdrawal of the French remaining troops, even if formally the foreign military presence in the area was presented as a guarantee against a potential threat of Ottoman forces. The campaign did not report a major battle, was severely affected by the severe health condition, which caused numerous human losses, mainly due to the fever and dysentery, which around caused 1,500 dead. The unexpected development of Navarino showed the divergent approach and perspective of the European powers. As retaliation of Navarino, as mentioned, the Ottoman Empire closed the strait to Russia, which in April 1828 declared war, and in June 1828 Russian troops crossed the Danube into Ottoman-controlled province of Dobruja. After an initial impetus in the Danubian principalities, the offensive suffered a partial setback. But with the new energetic leadership of the Prince General Hans Karl von Diebitsch, the Russian pressure was untenable and was accompanied by another powerful Russian offensive in the Caucasus region. Aside the ground fronts, the Russian Navy with the Mediterranean Squadron and the Black Sea Fleet imposed a severe sea blockade to the Ottoman coast and assisted the operation of the Russian forces. The Ottoman Empire, without Egyptian support, with the army fighting on 3 fronts of Greece, Danube, and the Caucasus, and without naval forces, was severely defeated. The Treaty of Adrianople, or Edirne for the Ottomans, was signed by the Count Alexey Fyodorevich Orlov for Russia and Abdul Qadir Bey for the Ottoman Empire on 14 September 1829, ended the war and was extremely severe for heavy for Constantinople. Besides recognizing the independence of Greece, the Sultan was forced to give the Danube Delta, its island, and a considerable portion of the Black Sea south of the Cuban estuary to Russia, opened the Dardanelles to all commercial vessels, granted autonomy to Serbia, allowed Russia to occupy Moldavia and Wallachia until the payment of a large indemnity, recognized Russia possession of Georgia, Yerevan, and Nachitchevan. Because of the new territorial arrangement and other article contained in the treaty, Britain, France, and other European powers, with the view the Treaty of Adrianople, an infringing of the promises that Russia had made in the London Treaty of 1827, even if it appeared that this Russian action was the decisive element for the achievement of the full Greek independence. But the Treaty of Adrianople prepared, especially with the ambiguous terms about Crimea, the deflagration of another major conflict, which between 1853 and 56 showed the lethal potentialities of new weapons generation and the global geographical extension. It's worth to recall that as occurred during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, a scientific commission named Expédition Scientifique des Marais was attached to the French troops and placed under the supervision of the Institut de France, directed by the naturalist and geographer Jean-Baptiste Bory de Saint-Vincent, 19 scientists representing different specialities in natural history, archaeology, architecture, and sculpture went to Greece in March 1829. Their work provided an essential element for the ongoing development of the new Greek state and more broadly, marked a major milestone in the modern history of archaeology, cartography, and natural science, as well as in the study of Greece. After 9 years of brutal war, Greece was finally recognized as an independent state under the London Protocol of February 1830. Further negotiation in 1832 led to the London Conference and the Treaty of Constantinople. The fora defined the borders of the new state and confirmed the Prince Otto of Bavaria as first king of Greece, ending a domestic institutional impasse ongoing since the blow of the insurgency. The foreign military intervention in the Greek independence war paved the way for further regional rivalries in the Balkans and the Levant between the three powers, soon joined by Austria-Hungary and lately by Italy and Germany. The uprising of Greek patriots was the ideological bastion and model for political uprising in mid-19th century, which stormed the entire Europe a few years after, formalizing the paradigm of the idea of humanitarian intervention, just war against tyranny. At the same time, the level of the violence against the civil population set up another paradigm, which boosted, without full awareness of its dangerous consequences, the Eurocentrism, distorted interpretation of concept of civilization and struggle against the barbarians, providing the ethical justification to the colonialism, especially in the second half of the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico, for your precise and informative paper. We move on to the third speaker, who plays a home match. It is Professor Kostis. Professor Kostis studied economics at the University of Athens and economic history at the École des Hautes Études et Sciences Sociales in Paris, where he defended his PhD. He has been the director of the Economic History Division of Athens University and a management consultant since 2004. And Professor Kostis specialized in economic and social history as well as business history. And he will share his thoughts on the Greek Revolution with us. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me first express my thanks to the organizers of this conference for inviting me and congratulate them for a flawless organization. So, in the early 19th century, Adamantios Korais, probably the most important person of the Greek Enlightenment and permanent resident of Paris, gave a lecture at the Société des Observateurs de l'Homme, in which he presented the state of Greek civilization. Its form was simple and repeated many times thereafter as a standard interpretation of the Greek War of Independence. In the early 18th century, according to Korais, Greece was an impoverished country repressed by a terrible yoke. Few schools and students resulted in incomplete knowledge of the Greek language, while the rest of the population lived in a state of ignorance. But this was also the era when enlightenment in Europe took a new direction, of which the encyclopedia was both the cause and effect. Certain rays of this light reached Greece, yet the country was very poor. Then, flourishing of trade and the Russo-Turkish War changed the situation. The former created material conditions for the development of education, while the latter led the subjugated nation to believe that freedom was an attainable goal, one that they themselves could succeed. These two factors led to overreactions, including the following, I quote, we are of Greek descent, we must strive to become worthy of this name or else no longer bear it. End of the quote. Schools multiplied, intellectuals rebelled, books were published in vast quantities. The moral revolution, for this is what Corais named it, had begun, and accelerated as the French Revolution added one more impulse to this quest for freedom. It was the era, I quote again, where national vanity gave way to a population ostensibly prepared to become a nation. The Greeks returned to their past to discover their future. Corais' view of the development leading to this Greek war of independence considered the Ottoman Empire a given, static situation of savagery and despotism. In this context, the Orthodox Christians found strength to be reborn, to become Greeks. This dynamic of change was thus detected exclusively in the subjugated peoples themselves, a natural position for a scholar influenced by the principles of French enlightenment. But this very same approach can be detected in modern Greek historiography, which overlooks how all the transformations in the realm of Orthodox existence are transformations that have to do with the Ottoman state's adaptation to new international realities and with Ottoman attempts to survive emerging international competition. Let's not forget that Selim III and Mahmud II, the last two sultans to occupy the throne before the fight for Greek independence, were those who had been primarily identified with reformist attempts in the pre-Tanzimat period. In fact, the impetus for these transformations surfaced from the Ottoman state itself, as the latter sought to secure more resources and enact more administrative and political reforms, rearranging the balance of power in the empire's political administration. Though this process has been linked with the Ottoman decline, it was actually nothing more or less than the Ottoman state mechanism processes of adapting the new international balance of power. And if the existence of quasi-autonomous rulers in the empire realm was considered a proof of the empire's disintegration, we must not forget that the empire was always capable of subduing these figures. The Patriarchate of Istanbul played a key role in this process as it managed to transform into a fundamental mechanism for the empire's political sovereignty. A mechanism that spread over large ranges of territory and commanded Orthodox populations. In this manner, the Ottoman state was able to infiltrate local communities and institutionalize political control within them, something which was rather unthinkable in its classical form, in the classical form of the Ottoman Empire. As it developed, it adopted modern governmental policies and mechanisms. Through this extension of patriarchal mechanisms, the Orthodox group known as Fanariots had an enormous benefit. Included in the empire's political circles, they took up high ranks within the empire's new systems of administration, took over leadership of the Danubian regions, principalities, and realized their place into the upper Orthodox Christian classes, whom they could dominate and profit from through religious mechanisms. Because before all else, the Fanariots were members of the Ottoman administrative elite, and this is where they derived their power. As a result, administrative mechanisms emerged within the empire that specifically, if not exclusively, addressed Orthodox populations. That is to say, they addressed an Orthodox Christian citizenry. This citizenry was certainly under Ottoman rule, but was also keenly aware of its position, at least when seen from a distance. In addition to them, local elites and landowning groups, equally essential to the administration of Christian populations, strengthened their positions for many of the same reasons. The expansion of tax farming mechanisms had brought them closer than ever before to the Ottoman administration. These new realities created new needs for the Orthodox populations. It became clear that an increasing number of educated Fanariot and landowning individuals were now able to staff church positions. This process began with the Patriarchate of Cyril Lucaris in the 17th century, but changes accelerated by the year. Further boosted by the rise of traders and other elites that required those same educational mechanisms for their advancement. But it was this very mechanism, supported and promoted by the Church, that created confrontations and tensions. The Church's reformist tendency found its complete expression in the scholars said to belong to the Enlightenment school, despite the fact that they never confronted the ecclesiastical environment to which they all owed their existence, as monks or priests. As it progressively developed, the education process, influenced by Western European trends, led to the formation of a new perspective on the nature of the Orthodox population itself. Greeks made their appearance in Western European thought, which gradually gave many Orthodox Christians the potential to extract themselves from the ecumenical fold and turn towards a national understanding of their destiny. However, it would be premature to make an argument for nationalism at this point. In reality, all oppositions within the Orthodox political community were oppositions regarding the content of its administration and finally regarding the content of Ottoman policies. It is worth noting that Korais, for example, did not believe in the necessity of a revolution because he did not think that Greeks were ready for such an event. Similarly, Michalis Pertikaris believed that Greeks had to remain under the Ottoman yoke just under different terms. The only exceptions were Rigas Fereos and the Balkan radicalism. But by nature of the views they advocated, they were far removed from any nationalism or proto-nationalism, as their political views were expressed in universal terms. Even by the beginning of the 19th century, the Orthodox population did not dispute Ottoman sovereignty. Rather, it negotiated with it. Konstantinos Koumas, a very important person of the Greek Enlightenment, asserted, I quote, "The Greek nation, despite all the misfortunes which it has suffered at the hands of its rulers, remained ever tranquil, and attributed its present plight to the inexplicable designs of divine providence. No trace of revolutionary ideas can be found in any sane individual's head. Indeed, the sound of mind denounced those responsible for the tragic scene that unfolded in the Peloponnesus in 1769. There were many of religious dispositions who out of pious zeal preached that divine providence subjected us to the Ottoman scepter in order, by this means, to protect us from heresies and from the growing indifference for divine matters that has been noted in various Christian countries. The drastic changes to come were largely caused by the new balances in the realm of international relations. Russia, disputing Ottoman integrity and hoping to win over the Orthodox Christian political, religious, and trade elite, found itself in a position to exert influences previously deemed unthinkable. In fact, the Orlov revolts showed the nature and limits of this potential reversal. Some political elites, chiefly local ones, sought to establish more favorable positions in a system free of Muslim domination, while elites from the central administration fought these changes that undoubtedly diminished their authority, their position, and most certainly their income. Depending on their positions and political choices, the Phanariots could hope for their own autonomous hegemony, supported by a member of the great powers. The arrival of the French within striking distance of the empire's territories rendered these prospects all the more attractive for the Orthodox Christians, as did the foundation of the septinsular state, the first, let's say, independent Greek political government at the time. But there was a great ways separating this moment from the outbreak of the War of Independence. To conclude, Often attempts are made to understand the War of Independence as a deterministic outcome of preceding transformation under the Ottoman state. That is to say, as a product of the economic, political, and intellectual growth of Orthodox populations within the Patriarchate of Constantinople of Istanbul. This growth is then linked with the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The underlying explanations in these cases are mechanistic and hardly match the empirical trends at our disposal. The War of Independence, as you may know, did not break out in a spontaneous or an announced manner. It was the product of many years of preparation and of specific goals, regardless of whether those goals were realized or successful, compared to their motivators and tensions. The formation of the friendly society and the manner with which it infiltrated or failed to infiltrate social groups in power that could catalyze the war cannot be neglected in any attempt to understand the process. It seems we know that disgruntled and displaced individuals within powerful social groups participated in the organization of the war effort, with the exception of the Peloponnesians and some island notables, who were subject to other pressures, who obliged them to participate in the friendly society. As for our armed leaders, it also seems as if only marginalized cases participated. Thus, perhaps, we should try to adopt the concept of a marginal elite suggested by Jack Goldstone to conceptualize a certain social phenomenon at the root of revolutionary movement. But that's another story. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your thought-provoking paper. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now time for questions and debate. If you would like to engage, please come forward. And I see the light on that micro is working, so I assume the micro is working. Please use that micro. Start by telling your name, your country, your question, pose your question, and tell us to whom your question is directed. And please refrain to questions, not to lengthy statements. Who has the courage to pose the first question? This is a military history congress, and soldiers are brave men and women, I should add. Chers collègues, à vous la parole.
J'ai un micro ici.
Ici?
Merci.
Ah là.
Ah, il est là. C'est Baban El Alaoui du Maroc, la délégation du Maroc. Professeur d'histoire, sciences politiques également. Et je suis donc l'un des anciens élèves de l'Université suisse de Genève de sciences politiques. J'ai ici un collègue d'ailleurs qui m'a reconnu tout à l'heure. Alors ma question, d'abord, la communication est très importante. Et j'ai trouvé un certain nombre de points communs entre la révolution grecque et surtout ce que nous avons déjà entendu de la part de nos collègues Alain Klebanov d'Israël et également notre collègue Enrico Magnani d'Italie. Tout cela a apporté beaucoup de lumière. Alors ma question est la suivante. J'ai deux petites questions qui sont un petit peu corrélées. La première, c'est quand on a parlé un petit peu du rôle de l'Égypte dans cette guerre auprès d'abord de la puissance de l'Empire ottoman. Est-ce que l'Égypte a joué un quelconque rôle à l'égard de l'Empire ottoman pour le soutenir à l'encontre de la révolution grecque? Et quel est ce rôle? Jusqu'à quel point l'Égypte a, avec ou sans le soutien, n'est-ce pas, a pu faire quelque chose. Ça, c'est la première petite question. La deuxième petite question concerne la confrérie secrète. La confrérie secrète a joué un rôle considérable, certainement. Tout à l'heure, on l'a souligné, mais dans certaines sources, essaient de minimiser un petit peu le rôle de la confrérie. Alors, je voudrais savoir jusqu'à quel point la confrérie secrète, ça dépend des pays. Par exemple, au Maroc, nous en aurons l'occasion d'en parler. Nous avons eu un mouvement nationaliste, le parti de l'Istiklal, par exemple. Mais je voudrais savoir, pour le cas d'espèce de la Grèce, quel est le rôle de cette confrérie secrète? Une confrérie secrète qui a été constituée de plusieurs composantes sociales, socioculturelles. C'est très, très important. Et je vous remercie pour toutes les lumières que vous avez pu apporter.
I think we could start with your second question, and I would like to invite our Greek colleague.
As I said, friendly society. Microphone. Now it's okay? Okay, thank you. As I said in my presentations, the friendly society was composed, well, we know something like 2,000 people, members of the friendly society, and it was composed by what I called the marginal elites. That means those who participated in the friendly society belonged to the groups who had not the power in the Ottoman Empire. Some of them were, for example, fanariots, but there were fanariots who have lost their power, and they were obliged to live in Russia, and they could not go back to the Ottoman Empire. That was the main logic composing the friendly society. Its importance, as without say, it was very important. They organized the War of Independence, and they've lost the power after the starting of the War of Independence. So, if we say that we could not imagine the War of Independence without the existence of these groups who participated in the friendly society, but at the same time, after the beginning, the friendly society did not play any role. I don't know whether I've answered your question.
With regard to the first question, the role of Egypt, Enrico, I start with you.
Merci. Si vous permettez, je parle en français dans ce cas, pour courtoisie au professeur. Le rôle de l'Égypte, c'était un rôle assez important dans le développement. C'était une ligne rouge qui a passé toute la guerre d'indépendance. Et parce que c'était un rôle qui était demandé, une aide qui était demandée par l'Empire ottoman, parce qu'il n'avait pas assez de forces et de ressources pour faire face à la puissance, à la pression des révolutionnaires grecs. Et pour un moment, c'était vraiment la force qui était vraiment a mis dans un coin les révolutionnaires grecs. Mais il faut aussi spécifier que c'était les résultats des négociations entre Constantinople et Caire. Parce que dans quel âge, même si c'était formellement partie de l'Empire, c'était de l'Empire ottoman, l'Égypte avait un statut vraiment particulier, était pratiquement un État autonome. Elle avait sa propre armée, sa propre flotte, sa propre administration. Même si elle était conduite par un vice-roi formellement, c'était de facto un roi indépendant. Une situation similaire, que je suis sûr que je rappelle une chose que vous connaissez bien, pour questions géographiques, c'est la régence algérienne. C'était plus ou moins la même chose. Pour des régions assez périphériques, le sultan avait adopté progressivement une politique de donner beaucoup de pouvoir aux certains territoires. Et aussi, déjà, les principaux danubiens, il avait même ce statut. Mais c'était, en effet, c'était la force qui a permis à l'Empire ottoman de garder un peu la main sur la Grèce, même si, comme j'avais mentionné, ils ont perdu la moitié de leurs soldats envoyés, 20 000 sur 40 000. Alors c'était vraiment un rôle très important. Je pense, j'espère d'avoir... merci.
Merci pour votre question. Je réponds en anglais. The role of Egypt, I completely agree with my colleague here, my dear colleague Enrico. The story of Egypt, and indeed North Africa, is very crucial and very interesting. A year after the story of the establishment of the French domination of the islands, Napoleon continues in the Mediterranean and arrives in Egypt, lands in Egypt, and awakens the Middle East. I mean, the Moyen-Orient, the Middle East was completely outside the scope of Europe for generations, for centuries. I mean, from the Crusades, after the last Crusades left the Middle East in 1291, for 500 years there was no European presence there. The Ottoman Empire reeled from the blow. I mean, the Ottoman Empire is gradually disintegrating, but this blow was a body blow. And indeed, as just said, after Egypt afterwards, I mean, Napoleon writes to the Sultan and says, well, I'm coming actually to help you because the Mamluks, although defeated by Selim I, in 1516, they are now independent. They are doing whatever they want. So I will come to help you. The Sultan, of course, does not believe him. He defeats the Mamluks, but then Egypt retains a degree of independence, which will gradually influence also the Arab world until La Réveil de la Nation Arabe of Najib Azuri in 1905. So we see here another very interesting and important process. Of course, huge influence on North Africa, because Napoleon's campaign also starts the interest of the Western powers in the region, the capitulations of the Ottoman Empire in 1829, and in 1830, France starts its intervention in Northern Africa. So there is a direct continuation, direct process. And thank you very much, because your excellent question brought it to light. Merci beaucoup.
Our Spanish colleague. Captain, please take the floor. Or the microphone coming to you. Yeah. Because you are a retired man, you have the full service pass.
Thank you very much. Je voudrais demander à mon ami Enrico Magnani. Navarino a été fondamental dans la fin de la guerre. Mais pourquoi le duc de Wellington, qui était le premier anglais, a retiré du commandement à l'amiral Codrington, qui était le boss, le chef de l'escadre britannique?
To my knowledge, sorry, excuse-moi. À ma connaissance, c'était dû aux capacités diplomatiques de l'homme. Seulement que ça. Et c'était aussi le commencement de la pénétration anglaise, de l'intérêt anglais vers l'Égypte. Et avec ça, c'est commencé à préparer un peu le terrain. Et clairement, il faut regarder tout comme j'avais dit, toute la manœuvre interalliée de France, Angleterre et Russie, c'était tout focalisé à chercher de ne pas permettre aux autres partenaires de gagner des points. Alors, même la présence de l'admiral Codrington, c'était à focaliser sur ça, pour trouver les meilleurs accord pour permettre aux troupes françaises de se déployer, mais pas donner trop d'espace à la France, clairement. Faire retirer l'Égypte de la dispute, mais pas de donner d'espace. Et aussi trouver une solution de compromis pour faire donner une façade d'indépendance à la Grèce, parce que c'était que ça. Et avec tous les respects, ça c'était une politique anglaise de beaucoup de temps envers l'Empire ottoman. Chercher de garder la Russie dehors, la France dehors. Et l'homme a réussi à trouver une solution acceptable pour le déploiement des troupes françaises, sans créer d'ultérieurs problèmes. Parce qu'il y avait déjà la bataille de Navarino et les relations étaient assez difficiles. Alors, pour éviter ça, on a trouvé un bon diplomate. Comme d'habitude, les officiers de marine, comme a dit le président hier, ce sont les meilleurs diplomates aussi.
Are there more questions? Or are we all longing for lunch? If not, yes.
A short remark. As we are about to conclude the no more questions, I'll take the liberty to put things a little bit in perspective, because 1821, of course, is the outbreak of the Greek War of Independence. It ends in 1829, and it's from liberté to eleftheria to liberté again, because 1829, when the Greeks achieve at least what seems to be, of course, the process will continue, but then it's a direct influence, encouragement, inspiration to the wave of revolutions in Europe in 1830. So Europe influences Greece, Greece influences Europe back. And of course, Les Trois Glorieuses of 1830, the Polish revolt in 1830, end of 1830, 1831, Belgium, it's all connected. So when you look at the broad picture, Greece comes into it in such a wonderful way. So Greece is present all over, not only the cradle of history, but a strong influence upon history as it continues.
This was a great addition to, a great remark to close this session. I thank you for your attention. I thank the speakers for their interesting papers. And above all, I would like to thank the interpreters for the way they're doing a very difficult job. Thank you very much, and I would like to invite you to join me in a big hand for them. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Something I think paper. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Well done. You're not used to sitting.